It's time to have your say. Welcome back to the Q&A, answering your questions in the wrestling community for another episode of AskSCW. Will begin straight after this. So welcome back to another episode of AskSCW. Going to be answering questions on WWE, AEW, Impact and much more, with the Survivor Series being a hot topic this week, and also some fantasy booking on the road to WrestleMania 38 featuring two of the biggest superstars in WWE. If you want to be involved on the next Q&A, you can drop a comment here on YouTube, leave the hashtag AskSCW with your question, or you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. All should be coming up on your screen right about now. But without further ado, let's get in with our first question this week. Supersonic X kicking us off, asking which WWE superstar will lose their titles heading towards Survivor Series in a few weeks. Great question to kick things up, and of course it's that time of year where WWE realise, hang on, we're doing Raw versus SmackDown, and these matchups we've got for title versus title doesn't quite make sense. We've got heel versus heel or face versus face. We want to, change the dynamics, so we've got the traditional face versus heel. So we've had some classics over the years. Who remembers we were meant to get Brock Lesnar versus Jinder Mahal? That changed to Brock versus AJ Styles. We were going to get that rematch the following year at Survivor Series. Of course, then AJ would drop his championship to Daniel Bryan, so that would be Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar. So we've had quite a number of times where this has happened in the past. So looking right now this year, WWE's motive, rather than actually having invasions and stuff like that with Raw and SmackDown, seems to be a story of, will those champions manage to keep hold of the belts going into Survivor Series? We've already had a number of instances where it looks like the champion is vulnerable, perhaps losing a match to a challenger, or championship matches already been set up on WWE TV. Of course, we've got on Raw this upcoming week, Bianca Belair challenging for the Raw Women's Championship. So could we find that Bianca wins the belt from Becky and she goes on the Survivor Series to take on Charlotte? Charlotte, on the other hand, seemed to be looking to be in a program with Sasha Banks, although I think the direction may have changed of this Friday night that we just passed on SmackDown. We'll be touching more on that topic in a couple of questions' time. I still do believe we're going to get Becky versus Charlotte at Survivor Series. I don't think that's going to change, but if one title was to be vulnerable of those two, I would predict at the moment that Charlotte's championship would be more vulnerable. But at the same time, Bianca versus Becky, it does have a big fight feel, and it does feel like the big blow off for this for the time being. Who knows, it could kind of go either way, but I still think Becky will keep hold of her championship. As for the tag teams, we see the New Day defeat the Usos this past week. I still believe that we'll get the Usos versus RK Bro. I don't see that changing. It's the money match, and we can't get it any other way, and I don't think we'll get it at all if we don't get it at Survivor Series this year, because I don't think Riddle and Randy Orton are going to be a tag team forever. So if they're going to do that match, now is the time. Survivor Series, I think that one is safe. Big E versus Seth Rollins could be a match that could happen on the road to Survivor Series. I hope they leave it till afterwards. Roman, he's untouchable. Roman's not dropping that championship for ever at this point. But will it be Roman versus Big E or versus Seth Rollins? That's a potential. If they do that match on Raw, I wouldn't be surprised if Seth was to win it. But at the same time, I do hope we keep with Roman versus Big E, because that feels like a very fresh match. And again, when will we get that match? Soon. I mean, Rollins versus Reigns can be done any pay-per-view, any big sort of time. It would main event. That's not a question. Big E versus Roman feels something fresh, something different, something we haven't seen before. Last but not least, though, is the United States Championship and the Intercontinental Championship. Here is going to be my one if it's going to change anywhere. Damien Priest is another champion that looks very safe for me, but the Intercontinental Championship for me seems vulnerable. We've got Happy Corbin chasing for that belt right now in typical WWE fashion. I would really like to see Damien Priest versus Shinsuke Nakamura, particularly. I'm always happy seeing that Shinsuke entrance. I don't want that taken away. But you could easily see that WWE might go and say, well, hang on, it's much more sensitive to do Priest versus Corbin. Therefore, I think if one championship is going to change hands between now and the Survivor Series, I would predict that the Intercontinental Championship will beat the one. But if it was my call, it was my choice, I don't think any of them should change at this point. If they're going to do title changes, then they should be after the Survivor Series. I quite like the way the matchups are balanced at this point. But knowing WWE, anything can happen. It's going to be very exciting. I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments. Which champions you think are vulnerable heading into the Survivor Series? And I mean, the one tomorrow night on Raw with Becky versus Bianca, that's going to be a match very much to keep an eye out for. It could go either way, which is why I put that in second place as most vulnerable championship. But I just can't see Becky losing at this point. Surely it's another DQ or false finish or something that could create another program going forward for perhaps Bianca Belair after Becky Lynch, and then she can chase the championship perhaps towards WrestleMania season again. But yeah, final answer, Intercontinental Championship is probably the most vulnerable, and sadly, Happy Corbin could be the one to take it from Shinsuke. Martin Lorenzo Correa, our next question now. How have you felt about the past few years of Survivor Series pay-per-view? Does it still feel like one of the 4 important pay-per-views, and can WWE make Survivor Series great again this year? Honestly, I'm still a big fan of Survivor Series. It's one of my favourite pay-per-views of the calendar year, just mainly if I go back for the history, the legacy, the lineage of what Survivor Series represents. I've always been a big fan of it, but like you say, the last few years it's been Raw versus SmackDown, which in some cases I can see people's arguments where, you know, especially the last couple of years, we have the draft that's not long before Survivor Series, so I think that can take a little bit of the shine away. But at the same time, I still think it's an important pay-per-view. I still see it as one of the big 4, even though arguably at this point I would say it's a big 5 in the calendar this year. Money in the Bank now, I think, definitely is with those other 4 pay-per-views in most importance. But I mean, Money in the Bank isn't always booked the best either, even though it's seen as one of the most important pay-per-views. So Survivor Series for me, it's still a big deal. It's a Thanksgiving tradition. It's a pay-per-view that does mean a lot to myself personally, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to be delivered to this year. I think we've got some great matches lined up. I think it's always quite a fresh card as well. You look back to last year, Drew versus Roman was absolutely fantastic. The year before that, we had NXT involved, and despite me saying in long term it wasn't the best thing to have NXT there on the night, Survivor Series was an absolutely epic show. Every year Survivor Series delivers great matches, and I mentioned earlier at the start of the video, Brock versus AJ, Brock versus Daniel Bryan were 2 outstanding matches that were in the years previous as well, and 2016 arguably the greatest Survivor Series match of all time with the Raw versus SmackDown teams that they had for the men on that show. So yeah, for me personally, I still think Survivor Series delivers. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do this year. If the matches stay as they are currently, there's some really fresh ones there amongst us with the champions versus champions, and of course as well with the idea of, you know, the Survivor Series teams still to come. I think that we get into some stellar teams that can be put together. I just want to see some reward at the end of this. I think that's the thing which would add just something to this. If Raw wins or SmackDown wins, they're guaranteed like the number 30 spot in the Royal Rumble. I think that's where you can just add a little bit of something from this. The show has to get something to benefit and something to fight for. I think that's the thing that's slightly missing from what this is of this concept. But otherwise, as a show itself, I think it usually delivers. So for me personally, I think it's really, really good. I think it's in a big 5 now rather than a big 4. If you ask WWE, it's probably a big 6 if you had Crown Jewel in there. But for me, I'm sticking with a big 5, and this is probably, it's the 4th or 5th biggest pay-per-view of the year. And yeah, it's still very special to me, as I said, going through the years and looking through some of the fantastic memories Survivor Series has had to offer. Particularly as I mentioned last week on this Q&A, Survivor Series 2002 being one of my personal all-time favourites. Next question coming from Anthony New. Now that Shotzi's a heel, do you think she'll win the SmackDown Women's title in the future? Well, who saw this coming this past week with the heel turn with Shotzi? I personally didn't when this show started. What I would say is, just to answer your question before going over the heel turn itself, I would say that I would say no in the immediate future, but what I would say is that WWE probably realises they don't have a Survivor Series team to fill out. I'd say Shotzi is going to be a part of that Survivor Series team. I would say her and Sasha Banks on the same Survivor Series team as well, with a feud going on, could be very interesting television. So for that, that's pretty exciting. And the way they booked Shotzi through this, I thought was fantastic. The way she came out as the babyface, saying, look, I've been stuck in the back, I want my opportunity, I want to some time to shine, having a 10 to 15 minute match with Charlotte Flair, when of course Charlotte's trying to dodge Sasha Banks as well. Sasha Banks playing cheerleader at ringside to the point that she got in the way that ended up costing Shotzi the match. And then Shotzi says, look, I've had enough of this, I'll be back in catering, back of the line. She's made herself an opportunity, she's given herself TV time, and she's now given a very interesting feud ahead with Sasha Banks, which probably pulls Sasha out of the championship picture for now. And like I say, if that's a rivalry that they have going into Survivor Series and on the same Survivor Series team, this is going to be very interesting television. I'm looking forward to seeing where it's going to go. I think it depends how well the crowd connects, because the crowd were really into Shotzi when she got a chance on SmackDown. The heel turn has happened. I really enjoyed what she had to say on Talking Smack, that little exclusive clip interview, which I've seen also available on Twitter if people haven't seen it, so make sure to go and check out on WWE's page. But yeah, this is exciting stuff. I would say if it connects well enough, I mean, I don't think Becky was supposed to get as over as she did, but look at her now. So, I mean, if it can connect like that, then why not for Shotzi? But I would say in the immediate to short, medium future, I would say no with the championship opportunity, but certainly I think it gives her a chance to break out going forward. Certainly for someone like a Carmella spot this time last year, but I think that this has got potential to connect better with fan base, even though that Shotzi now is going to be a heel. So she'll be on the Survivor Series team, she'll probably have a feud going with Sasha Banks, probably will keep that run going to at least the Royal Rumble. I hope from Rumble to WrestleMania it can elevate Shotzi in some form further still, but we'll have to wait and see with that one. If it can get over the way it can do, then yeah, of course she can get herself in the championship picture and maybe become champion one day. But this particular moment, I think this is just something filler for Survivor Series. It will give Sasha the eventual win in this rivalry, and then we'll see what goes on with Shotzi afterwards, because I assume Sasha then will go after Charlotte Flair. But yeah, it's really good to see Shotzi on TV. They really put her over big. I really like the way it was booked, and let's hope this is the start of something special. Fantasy booking time next with our next question from Mike, Tanhabs Mike. How would you book a Brock Lesnar versus Drew McIntyre feud between now and WrestleMania 38? Such an interesting idea, and the thing is as well, we had this match at WrestleMania 36, so that would have to play into the storyline as well. I'm not sure if this would be the actual direction, but I like where you're going with this, and I know that we did speak actually on the message as well. You said the idea of Brock versus Roman at WrestleMania again would seem a bit like fans have seen it. We don't need to see it one more time. And of course, even though perhaps Drew versus Roman would seem like a good idea, of course, let's not forget that Drew probably more likely would be a contender for the championship when they get to that UK show that's planned for next September. So what they can do between now and then, and this idea of this match certainly feels like it's a lot of fun, but we have to take where we are in current storylines to get to where we could get to there. So first and foremost, Drew McIntyre, he's gone to SmackDown, he's winning matches, and I think we need to keep that momentum. We go to the Survivor Series. Drew is the sole survivor in the Raw versus SmackDown teams, and that way Drew solidifies himself as a top contender and goes into where he's going to go into the Royal Rumble next year, and he's seen as a heavy favourite. Brock Lesnar, as we know right now, is suspended. I think he should return on the Day 1 pay-per-view on January 1st. His suspension is lifted at the start of next year, and of course that gives him the opportunity to come in after Roman successfully defends his championship in the main event on the pay-per-view. I'm going to say that the match is against Xavier Woods, because the King of the Ring should mean something, damn it. If you win that, you should get a championship match. So for me, I'd have Roman versus Xavier in the main event of that pay-per-view. Roman picks up the victory, and of course, where fans may say, oh, that's pretty predictable, your big surprise, your big shock is that Brock returns at the end of this match and absolutely destroys Roman Reigns, which builds then these two to have a match at the Royal Rumble. That way, you haven't got to worry about that match being at WrestleMania, and we can continue where things left off, where Paul Heyman, where is he aligned? Is he with Brock? Is he with Roman? This storyline can play out and continue as it's meant to at the Royal Rumble with a conclusive finish. The beautiful part about that though, with the Royal Rumble coming up, of course, you can call your shot, and a lot of those contenders in the Royal Rumble match don't have a lot of storyline direction or opponents at that point. So Drew McIntyre can actually confront Roman and Brock in the middle of one of their promos. And what would be really interesting is Drew saying, look, I'm calling my shot now. When I win the Royal Rumble, I'm coming after one of you two guys, and we're going to main event WrestleMania. He can say, Roman, I owe you a defeat because you've beaten me previously, and Brock, last time we faced, it was a dream of mine, but I beat you at WrestleMania 36. I can easily do it again in 5 minutes, and next time I'm gonna do it in front of fans, which I think would niggle Brock a little bit, the fact that he lost that match in 5 minutes, the fact it wasn't in front of fans, and Brock can almost say it's a bit of a fluke, and that way Brock, although is the babyface, can start to feel a little bit of a tweener. As we get to the Royal Rumble, Brock Lesnar is unsuccessful when it comes to defeating Roman Reigns. Roman goes on to WrestleMania to face his opponent, whoever it's going to be, and it's the first match of the card because with Roman, he's either in the main event or the opener. Here, I've decided to go for the opener, and the men's Royal Rumble match is the main event. And as we go throughout the evening, we see Drew McIntyre speaking on the microphone backstage, saying, well, clearly then, Brock Lesnar didn't get the job done, and he says, well, Roman, you're clearly my focus. I'm going to win the Royal Rumble match, and you are the guy I'm going to face. We've come down to the final few of the Royal Rumble match, and this is the point where, even though he's not in the match, Brock Lesnar does turn up and destroys Drew McIntyre, throwing him over the top rope and taking away his WrestleMania opportunity. When it comes to explanation of why Brock Lesnar did this, it's simple. He says, look, it was a fluke that he beat me 2 years ago. He thinks he can do it easily, and once I lost my match at the Royal Rumble, he couldn't keep my name out of his mouth. He had to emphasize that I lost that match. So my opportunity was taken away from me at WrestleMania. I decided to take away his opportunity. It's as simple as that. And he throws a challenge out to Drew McIntyre, saying, I can beat you at WrestleMania, and you think you could beat me in 5 minutes? I know I will beat you in 5 minutes. Drew McIntyre, of course, accepts this challenge. He's doing loads of open challenges of late, so of course he would accept any challenge that comes his way. And of course, having his WrestleMania opportunity taken away from him this way, Brock Lesnar seems like the perfect opponent to beat at this year's WrestleMania. But of course, leading up to it, Elimination Chamber, Fastlane, who knows what the pay-per-views are involved. Of course, it would be a good opportunity on one of those for Drew to take on Roman Reigns, to try and win that championship, to then go into WrestleMania as champion to take on Brock Lesnar, which puts Brock in a very interesting scenario because he could then be involved in the championship match. But at the same time, these two have been battling week after week in some format. When Brock is in the house, he's either destroying Drew McIntyre with F5s, or at the same time, Drew McIntyre can sneak in from behind and hit some claymores. So we've got some one-upsmanship going into this show. Now, when it comes to that pay-per-view match with Roman versus Drew, of course, Brock Lesnar finds himself out there. We see a referee bump, and of course, it's in Brock's interest, of course, for Drew McIntyre to win this match, because if Drew wins that match, their match is a championship match at WrestleMania. So you find yourself where Brock actually, you could say, is there conflict? Is there not? With that ref bump, he grabs himself a steel chair. He looks like he's going to hit Roman Reigns with this, but Roman Reigns ducks, hits Drew McIntyre over the head with a steel chair, and at this point then, Roman finds himself picking up the victory. When asked the next night on Raw if it was meant for Roman or meant for Drew, Brock says, look, do I want to be Universal Champion? Of course I do, but I'm more interested in kicking ass, and I'm more interested right now in kicking Drew McIntyre's ass. I will get that Universal Championship when I want it and when I'm ready. So it builds the match then, the epic showdown of Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 38. If you want to book how I'd book a winner, simply, yes, it wouldn't be a fluke. Drew McIntyre would pick up the victory at WrestleMania, and they could have this big time field match in front of fans, which I think would be a pretty awesome match to see. So yeah, if you like that idea, let me know in the comments below. How would you book Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar if that was to be a match for WrestleMania 38? Give me the storyline details you would like to see happen in the comments below. Next question comes from Wrestling by Waldridge. He says, looking at the Impact women's roster, is there anyone you think could make their way to the WWE? He thinks Havoc would do a stellar job, and in his opinion has more ability than Nia Jax and Nyla Rose as bigger ladies. I think Havoc's a great suggestion you make there. I definitely think she would be a good choice if WWE were to go for someone in that role. And like you say, she's definitely got a lot of ability. I love her finisher. I think the gimmick works really, really well. So yeah, that would be a good shout as well. And I remember Impact doing like this throwback sort of NWA style show a couple of Thanksgivings ago. And I think it was like a 4 horsewomen style faction with Tessa Blanchard. And I think Jordynne Grace was a part of this as well. And yeah, I mean, she looked pretty badass when she was part of that as well. So she could definitely fill a number of different roles. havoc. But yeah, she's a great selection. My selection, though, for someone that's not been in WWE, part of the Impact roster, because it's very easy to go with some of the ones that have been there in the past. Deonna Purrazzo in particular has been outstanding as it's joining Impact, but I'm going to go with a different name this time because some part of the Impact roster I think would do a great job in WWE is Jordynne Grace. I think she would be a standout in the women's division. She's got a great look, she's got a great power game. I love her in-ring style. There's some of the great dream matches you could have with Jordynne Grace in the WWE, whether it was part of NXT, whether it was Raw or SmackDown. You've only got to name the likes of, like Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, Sasha Banks. We can even go down to the lower parts of the cards with like the Liv Morgans as well. There'll be some great matches you could have with Jordynne Grace in WWE. She could power up with the likes of a Nia Jax as well if need be, or perhaps a Shayna Baszler. So there's many great matches and stories you could tell with Jordynne Grace, and I think she'd be quite believable as well as a sort of powerhouse babyface, or even as a heel if you wanted to go down that avenue. I'm so happy that she's the first digital media champion in Impact history, and I'm going to be touching more on that now as we go into our next question. And that comes from Mark Q, World Order. Thoughts on the inaugural Digital Media Championship title tournament, the championship match results, and how would you like to see this title booked going forward? I must admit, I was quite satisfied with how it was booked and how it was arranged. Of course, we got to the six-pack challenge. It's an intergender title as well. We had 3 men, 3 women vying for that championship. I do think the match on the kickoff, if you want, I'm going to call it the kickoff to Bound for Glory, was a bit short. I think there could have been a longer match to actually showcase the talent a bit more. I think that's the one thing I would have done differently. But like I said in the previous question, they picked the correct winner, the first ever digital media champion being Jordynne Grace. And there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. But first off, just to say, I think she's the perfect role model that you could have putting on your media platforms, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Impact Plus, whether it goes onto apps like Facebook or Twitter. I'm not quite sure all the digital media platforms they're going to go on with this, but they need to make this championship, I suppose, have people that can connect with that are not fans of Impact Wrestling. If someone's going to stumble across this by accident on YouTube, who's someone you're going to look and say, that makes me want to see more of that product? Jordynne Grace is someone that ticks that box. You could argue some of the people in that match that was there, yeah, it was totally fine they were in the match, but would not have been the right people to win it, especially being the first ever. If you look and say as future champions of what you could do, I mean, Chelsea Green would be a good candidate. I know she's going to go for the #1 contendership. If you go into like the men's division, someone like a Matt Cardona I think would be perfect for that sort of solution as well, because I mean, he did the Internet Championship thing, of course, the Long Island IC story on YouTube 10 years ago that got over massive, so they could have a bit of fun with that. I think Rohit Raju would make a good champion. In fact, he would be the one I would have beat Jordynne Grace, just because you know what he's like. I think he'd be quite fun in that intergender environment. But one thing's for sure as well, and this is what you say, how I'd like to see this championship book going forward. Like you say, meaningful matches and stuff that I think people can connect to. One story that I think people can connect to is, do we throw that question mark in once again with Jordynne Grace and Rachel Ellering? Because yes, I want to see them remain as a tag team. I think that they could be great at one point going against the Inspiration for the gold, but with Jordynne winning this and Rachel not, does it throw a question of which tag team partner is the more dominant of the two? Is it to a point that Rachel feels that she needs to challenge for other championships to try and compete and be in the same bracket as Jordynne? Does jealousy creep in? Does it create a rivalry out of that? That could be an interesting avenue to go down, because before the idea was Jordynne Grace turn on Rachel, we've not seen the idea if Rachel would turn on Jordynne. So there is certainly different ways you could go down with this, but one thing I suppose we do have to keep in mind as well, this sort of championship is more designed for, like we said, the social media platforms. It's not really designed and going to be a mainstay on Impact TV. So for that reason as well, we kind of probably have to keep our expectations a bit low. It's probably not going to have the biggest stories that are going in the company, but it's certainly one I would like to see them explore. And maybe if Jordynne was to overcome that, like I say, someone like Rohit Raju can get a sneaky roll-up victory to get that championship, and then perhaps at some point we get it on Matt Cardona, because I think that's definitely someone who should hold this championship during its run in Impact. Last question this week comes from Corey Beatty. Who do you think will win the AEW World Title Eliminator Tournament of Full Gear to face Hangman for the AEW World Title, Moxley or Bryan Danielson? Well, providing Hangman does do the job at Full Gear and wins the World Title from Kenny Omega, it definitely would be a worthy first contender of having either Bryan Danielson or Jon Moxley. I think it's a foregone conclusion Moxley will defeat Orange Cassidy on this week's upcoming Dynamite. This was the big question I had last week on the channel, and I said at the time that I thought Bryan Danielson would win. win. I still currently stick with that. I need to see some interaction between these two before the pay-per-view to see something that would change my mind. Moxley, though, does seem like he's going towards that heel turn. Let's be fair, he destroyed number 10 this week. It was very violent as well, the way it was done. He didn't want to be in and around the people, so it feels like Moxley is going towards that heel turn that many have speculated for quite a while now. So, I mean, perhaps it would make sense for Moxley to defeat Bryan Danielson, because it would make a great heel competitor to go against Hangman Adam Page as the first challenger, perhaps going into Revolution. But at this moment, I stay with Bryan Danielson as my selector for the winner of Full Gear for the World Title Eliminator Tournament. It makes sense as well because he's the only one currently in the final that's going to be in that match. But I guess I will reserve full judgment until I make my full predictions, which will be on the week of Full Gear. So make sure to keep an eye out for when that video does drop. But that's all for me this week. Anyway, thank you so much for everyone that's been asking your questions and getting involved as always here at AskSCW. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If it's your first time watching, please like, share, hit the subscribe button as well, and hit the bell as well. Turn the notifications on to all, each and every time a video has been released. Make sure to keep an eye out for the channel as well. More videos will be dropping through the week, and go and check out the other videos that have been uploaded this week. With it being Halloween as well, happy Halloween if you are watching on Sunday, the 31st of October. Why not go and check out the latest retro review, which was Halloween Havoc 1997. I was joined by Wrestling by Waldridge. Go and treat yourself on this Halloween and watch that live stream that we did. It was a lot of fun going over that review, particular matches that we were talking about. The 5-star classic, the title versus mask match between Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, one of the greatest matches in WCW history, and as well as that, the steel cage match with Hogan and Piper, and as well as that, the Las Vegas sudden death match between DDP and Macho Man Randy Savage. But that's all from me today anyway. Thank you for watching. All the best. Check out these videos on the side right now. I'll see you soon here on SCW. Take care. Have yourselves a great day.